I'm ready when you are.
Well, welcome everybody to the our Thursday evening Zooms, our solar stories and other clean energy stories. And thanks for coming. And as those of you who've been here before know, I need to thank our sponsors: the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, Homeland Solar, Harvest Solar, Sri Energy, and Sumter Solar. And tonight we have a topic that's on many people's minds these days. Lots of interest, controversy. Erik Nordman is the director of the Institute of Public Utilities at Michigan State University. And I saw his name mentioned in an article about AI data centers. And Erik and I had worked together in the past on wind energy. And so I contacted him, and he was gracious enough to kind of join us tonight and give us his thoughts on data centers in Michigan communities. Please mute yourself. Go ahead, Erik.
All right. Thank you very much, John, and thank you all for coming out tonight to this Zoom talk. Yeah, data centers and Michigan communities. So the data centers present a set of challenges to Michigan communities, but potentially some opportunities. And also for the utilities, both challenges and opportunities. So I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about the overview of data centers, what they are, and what they do. Then we'll talk into about some of the energy and water use, some of the challenges that many of you are reading about with regards to data centers. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with discussion of some utilities and policies that may constrain or facilitate data centers here in Michigan. Oh, and I should just as a background, I should give a plug for my institution. So, as John said, I'm the director of the Institute of Public Utilities at Michigan State University, and the IPU provides professional development training for folks in the utility sector, including the regulators at public utility commissions across the country, environmental advocates, consumer advocates, and industry staff. All of our programs are online and live, and they cover the gamut from the fundamentals of utility regulation, which is um, our flagship course, and then we have programs in accounting and rate making, cost allocation and rate design, the grid school, which focuses on electricity and other topics. So feel free to contact me if you're interested in participating in any of our online programs. All right, so now back to our presentation. So what is a data center? Data centers house infrastructure for running computer programs that store and transmit digital information. So that's a very generic definition, but it encompasses a lot of things. Michigan already has lots of data centers that do pretty much all of your typical tasks that you're uh, encounter through your day. So checking your email is flowing through a data center. If you're watching a video, if you're on a Zoom call, that's coming through a data center. If you're storing stuff on the cloud, so if you have a cloud drive, a Google Drive, or if you're working on a Google document, that's stored in the cloud, that's in a data center. And now, increasingly, we have artificial intelligence or AI. Many of these tasks were done on data centers, going back to the telecom days, 25 years ago or more. Um, but what everybody's talking about today are actually a special type of data center called a hyperscale data center that is specifically built for these AI tasks. And we can see this here. This is comes from a report from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. These data centers come in a variety of facility sizes and types. So basically, the size is related to what these data centers are doing. At the bottom, the smallest size is a telco edge. It goes up to commercial edge and enterprise branch. Please don't ask me what all these different types are. But then you can see up at the top, we have co-location. medium scale, co-location, large scale, and hyperscale. And these are kind of what we want to focus on. Co-location means it's a big data center that basically rents out space to users. So maybe Google has part of it and they're doing Google Drive stuff in one part, and Amazon has its web services uh, in another part. So it's one big facility, but they're renting out space and they're co-locating multiple companies in that one space. And then at the top, the biggest facility size are these hyperscale data centers. These are what we're hearing about in the news today. Things that are, taking up hundreds of acres of warehouses full of computers, right? And these are the ones that are dedicated to AI processing. Yeah, so like I said, most of these up to the co-locational, small, medium scale, these are what we would call conventional data centers. They are, basically in a bigger version of an IT closet that you might have in your office building. They could be an office building itself in a suburban office park. You probably wouldn't notice. Um, these are just ordinary buildings that happen to be full of computers and are using quite a bit of electricity, but really not noticeable. It's the top ones, the large scale co-location and hyperscale are the ones that are focused on using AI. Again, from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory report, we can see over time how the distribution of these data centers has changed over time. So going back to 2010, for example, we see, in the orange colors, a lot of these small facility sizes, and then a whole bunch of the gray, these internal, kind of medium-sized data centers that are doing, ordinary web traffic, hosting your email, streaming videos, and things like that. And then very few at the top. You see the dark blue and the light blue. Those are the large scale co-location and hyperscale. Very few of those. And this is the percentage of servers. So even as the absolute number of servers is growing, we're just looking at a constant percentage. And you can see up through 2018, it's really dominated by those internal data centers. You start to see a little bit of growth in hyperscale. After about 2018, 2019, boom, huge growth in co-location large scale and hyperscale data centers. This goes out to 2028, so beyond 2024 is a projection. But you can see even now the growth areas are all in these large scale and hyperscale data centers that are being built specifically for AI processing. Michigan already has lots of data centers. We have more than 70 mostly small data centers scattered throughout the state. And like I said, we rely on them all the time, streaming videos, uh, backing up your files, your pictures on your phone in the cloud, Google Sheets, streaming videos, all this stuff happens all the time. We're always acting with data centers, basically anytime we go on the internet. So we have lots of these data centers already, but it's these hyperscale data centers that are being proposed now that are causing so much controversy. One of the latest data centers to be proposed is in Southeast Michigan, and it was called Project Cannoli. I thought this was a really funny name. I it In high school, I worked at an ice cream shop, and we also served cannolis. This was back on Long Island, New York. And a pro tip, if you're ever interested in cannolis, you have to fill the cannoli just before you eat it. You want to make sure that the shell stays nice and crunchy. Never get a pre-filled cannoli. That's going to make the cannoli shell soggy. You want to put that filling in right before you eat it so it's nice and crunchy. That's my pro tip for you. Um, but this Project Cannoli was or is being planned for Southeast Michigan. Still needs to be certified by the given its blessing by the Public Service Commission, but they have an agreement with DTE for a 1 gigawatt data center. These data centers are usually described in terms of gigawatts, their electricity demand. So 1 gigawatt is a lot of electricity, right? So this is one to watch. Like I said, it's like 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts. The site was already zoned light industrial. And this is really critical. The definition in Van Buren Township of light industrial included the words data center. And typically that would be a small building, with some computers, some servers, pretty nondescript. It's not going to generally make a lot of noise. It might have some air conditioners. But those definitions were probably written in the 1990s. Nobody was anticipating, gigawatt scale data centers that would occupy hundreds of acres and require, huge amounts of infrastructure. So a lesson to folks in, the planning and zoning at the local level is to review your planning and zoning definitions. And if you have data centers in there, make sure they're defined appropriately you know, because as we saw, data centers can mean lots of different things. The issue is that these hyperscale data centers, or one of the issues, is that these hyperscale data centers use enormous amounts of electricity. There was a proposed data center here in Lansing, Michigan. It last month was withdrawn, but we can still use this as an example, just a comparison. So this was 24 megawatts in size, so which is still a lot of electricity, a pretty big demand. It's enough. It's the equivalent of about 20,000 homes. We can compare that to the one in Saline, Michigan, which has been approved by the Public Service Commission. That's 1,400 megawatts. So these are really completely categorically different types of developments. And that's one message I want you to take home with you, that data centers are not one monolithic thing. There are lots of different kinds of data centers, and we clearly need them. Um, but we shouldn't treat things like a 5 megawatt data center, a 10 megawatt data center, the same as one that's 1,400 megawatts, right? The one in Saline would consume enough as much electricity as about 1.1 million homes. It would occupy or use about 25% of Michigan's largest utility, and that's slightly less than Detroit's electricity consumption. So just imagine that for one single data center, hyperscale data center, we're going to more or less build the electrical infrastructure comparable to what's needed to support Detroit. Of course, not all the distribution lines and things, but that's how much electricity demand it would have. And just to put it graphically, that Lansing facility is about, I think, 3%. I forget exactly, but there's a little sliver of what the one in Saline, Michigan would consume. So just these are really on different scales, and we should not evaluate them the same. They're not going to have the same impacts. Yeah. So the Lawrence Berkeley report noted that currently data centers, all these different types of data centers, use about 4.5% of all the electricity produced in the United States. And that's expected to expand in the next couple of years out to 2028, just 2 years from now. It could increase from 4.5% to 6 to 12% of all the electricity in the United States, right? So that would be from just under 200 terawatt hours of electricity to the low end of 325 terawatt hours all the way up to 580 terawatt hours. So what do these numbers mean? Well, the midpoint, if we pick the midpoint, would be about 430 terawatt hours. That would be all the electricity generated in 2024 by the entire states of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. That's a tremendous amount. And I had to double check, like, wow, all of New York, all of New Jersey, all of Pennsylvania. That's a lot, right? Well, if we're using 10% of the electricity in the United States, we've got 50 states, 10%, five states. Yeah, so these, it kind of checks out. I just had to do like a quick double check. Like, does that really make sense? Yeah, I guess it does. That's a lot of electricity. So that brings up the question, where is all this electricity going to come from? Right? Earlier this year, back in February, I went to a meeting down in Washington, D.C., and one of the panelists on the stage was FERC Chair Laura Sweat. And she said that she expects 90% of the power for data centers to come from natural gas, right? For, what do we say? All this growth in data centers, so going from 200 to, so more than 200 terawatt hours or more, all that's going to come from natural gas, or 90% of it. Now, that was her expectation. And I mean, my interpretation of that was that she was not concerned. She thought this was like a huge opportunity for the natural gas industry. Um, I talked to a person that works in the Amazon data center division, and she was kind of taken aback when I told her that. And the Amazon representative said that, Amazon, Google, Meta, many of these big name data center owners have their own commitments to renewable energy. So they are not planning on powering their data centers with natural gas in the long run, at least. They may have to do it in the short run, but they have their own voluntary internal commitments to using renewable energy. Also, states like Michigan have clean energy or renewable energy standards, right? 16 states, in fact, have established 100% clean energy standards. And Michigan is one of those. All right, so we've got this tension here between the data center owners who want to get these things up and running as soon as they can, and some of them will use whatever fuel is available. We've got the FERC chair who says, yeah, we've got lots of natural gas, just run it off of natural gas, and I expect 90% of these uh, data centers are going to run on natural gas. And then we have many state policies, um, like here in Michigan, that say, wait a sec, we have these clean energy targets that our utilities have to meet. So yeah, we have some tension here. One of the phrases that you hear from a lot of the data center owners is this phrase, speed to power. And that's what's driving many of these energy decisions. They, once they buy these AI chips, now these are the highest technology AI chips. Um, they want to use those chips because that's how they make money. They take out a loan, they buy these very expensive AI chips. They need to plug them in, start doing the processing, and earn money right away, which means they need electricity right away. Also, the new version of the AI chip is constantly evolving. So these things don't even have a long shelf life, right? So they really want to get up and running as fast as possible. Also, there's so many proposals for these data centers. We know many of them, if not most of them, are not going to work out. There's going to be a lot that never get built, or there's going to be a shakeout. There's going to be something, right? It's very unlikely that all of these things will be built. So there's a bit of a race. Who's going to get up and running fast? But the challenge is that it connecting new generation sources to the grid can take years, right? We've got to do all the interconnection studies and things. It takes a very long time. So what's a data center going to do? Well, some might bring their own power, kind of run some, uh, well, the one in Lansing that was proposed was going to use natural gas fuel cells to power its data centers, in addition to some uh, grid energy from the Lansing Board of Water and Light. Um, but others are, using temporary diesel generators, uh, temporary natural gas generators. There are even reports of repurposing cruise ship generators. They're really trying to get whatever electricity generation technology they can to get these facilities up and running. And there's even a question about their air quality permits, like Elon Musk's XAI facility, that's a picture of it there. He got in trouble because he did not have the air quality permits to um, to do this, right? So they're just kind of it's kind of a lot of rogue actors in this space, and the regulators are trying to catch up. Now, Michigan has policies that promote data centers, but also constrain data centers' energy choices. So we have incentives. We have economic incentives here in Michigan um, for data centers. We also have clean and renewable energy standards. And we see um, some talk from the White House, from Washington, about some voluntary, what the president called a ratepayer protection pledge, which was a voluntary approach to uh, that the data center owners will voluntarily promise to pay for the additional infrastructure that's required to serve those data center customers. So, I guess, yeah, let me talk about the incentives. Um, so here in Michigan, we have a law that encourages data centers to come here and bring their economic development. Um, so they can get a break on their sales and use taxes. So these data centers, when they buy these very expensive computer chips, they don't have to pay sales tax on them if they are investing $250 million or more, and promise to employ at least 30 people at an above market wage, like a prevailing wage, a livable wage. And they have to obtain 90% of their electricity from clean sources within 6 years of operation. So there is this incentive for data centers and these big hyperscale data centers specifically to come to Michigan, um, but they have to abide by these constraints. And as I mentioned before, there are also the clean and renewable energy standards that we have. 100% clean energy. The utilities have to get 100% clean energy um, by 2040. So these are um, hopefully going to constrain, and we don't see lots of kind of rogue temporary diesel generators going up and things like that. That the data center owners that come here want to build in Michigan will work with the utilities to build that infrastructure, and hopefully that will strengthen the grid, as we'll see, and that could be an opportunity for everybody. All right. The key question, though, here, or another key question, I guess we have lots of questions. Should other customer classes subsidize AI infrastructure? And what happens if the AI bubble bursts, right? What happens if Consumers Energy or DTE goes out and says, yeah, Project Cannoli, Google, we want to work with you. We're going to build all this infrastructure to serve your Project Cannoli data center. And then Google says, after a few years, yeah, thanks, that was great. We're actually going to move to Ohio and consolidate over there and, just close up shop. Who's going to pay for all that grid infrastructure that was built if Google's not even here? So the utilities and the Public Service Commission are taking steps to protect consumers. There are two different approaches. So first, we have consumers energy that has created basically a new rate class, a customer class for these hyperscale data centers. So these are data centers that are 100 megawatts or larger. So the one that was proposed in downtown Lansing, that would not fall under this. There was another one that opened in Detroit back in September. That was like 4 megawatts, right? These are relatively small. This would not apply to those. Those are more conventional. So this is hyperscale, 100 megawatts or larger. Consumers Energy is going to require a minimum of a 15-year contract. So they're locking in the data center owners to a contract for 15 years. If they bolt to Ohio or Indiana or some other state, right, they're still on the hook for the rest of that contract time period. And they're going to be billed for at least 80% of the peak demand. No matter how much electricity they actually use, um, they're going to be billed uh, for at least 80% of that peak demand. That's the way that like the president said, we're going to protect ratepayers. He wants to do it voluntarily, but here Consumers Energy is actually putting it into a customer class rate schedule that says, the costs of serving these data centers is going to be borne by the data centers, right? It shouldn't be subsidized by the rest of the customers. DTE has taken a slightly different approach. They're going on a case-by-case basis. So when they negotiated the Saline Township data center, they had their negotiations. When they did Project Cannoli with Google, they're doing it, maybe slightly differently, but generally it's the same approach. The contracts specify that the infrastructure costs will be paid by the data centers and that they're locking them into long-term contracts and that the other rate classes, the customer classes, will not subsidize that infrastructure. So the optimistic take is that data centers could drive utility upgrades, right? So this is the upside of it. The data centers need consistent electricity, right? They want to be able to train their models in some data centers. And I guess I should have said that too. There are kind of multiple types of hyperscale data centers. Some are for training the AI models, and some data centers are actually answering the queries that people are putting into ChatGPT or Gemini. So there are multiple, even within the hyperscale, there are different types of data centers that are doing slightly different tasks. But either way, these are very, big, high power facilities that need consistent electricity. And these companies have big pockets. These are some of the wealthiest companies in the world. We've got Amazon, Google, Meta, and others. They have deep pockets and they are willing to pay for infrastructure improvements. So those infrastructure improvements, yes, will go directly to benefit the data centers, but they're also the potential for spillover benefits to all customers because these infrastructure investments hopefully will make the entire grid more resilient, more reliable, modernized, and all of that. So all the customers might benefit from this. That's the optimistic take. We can see this in Google's Project Cannoli in the contract they signed with DTE. They signed a Clean Capacity Acceleration Agreement, is what they called it. So remember, this was a 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatt facility that's been proposed. So Google is said they are going to build 1,600 megawatts of new solar capacity here in Michigan. Also, they're going to build 400 megawatts of battery storage and 300 megawatts of other clean energy and demand response um, facilities and programs. Also, to kind of sweeten the deal for the host communities, they're proposing a $10 million community benefit fund that the host community would be able to use on projects, for improving recreation, improving uh, fire and, emergency response and things like that. So these are some of the ways that, Google is both complying with um, the economic incentive regulations and laws, the uh, clean energy standard we have here in Michigan, its own voluntary commitments to renewable energy, and voluntary committing to the community benefit fund. So this is kind of okay. This is probably one of the best, more optimistic takes on a data center. But at the end of the day, I kind of describe this as a red queen problem. So this is red queen problems are they come up in the environmental literature. I didn't make this phrase, but it comes from the sequel to Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll's book Through the Looking Glass. So Alice goes back to Wonderland and meets the Red Queen. And Alice says to the Red Queen, well, in our country, you generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast. So here in Michigan, electricity demand growth has been pretty flat. We've been using the same amount of electricity, uh, basically for a few decades. And even though we have lots of more devices in our homes, um, our population has been growing slowly, but there have been really great improvements in energy efficiency, and we've been doing more, getting more energy services with the same amount of generation. But now, oh, and then we've got our renewable and clean energy standards that we're trying to comply with. So, you know, up to this point, it's been a process of, closing down and decommissioning our fossil fuel infrastructure, replacing that with clean and renewable infrastructure. And we've got a 2040 timeline, right? A target goal. So we've got to run pretty fast uh, to get to that goal. Now, these hyperscale data centers are coming in with demands that are equivalent to the entire city of Detroit, the entire city of Grand Rapids. We're building potentially multiple, equivalents of brand new cities in these hyperscale data centers. And we still have to comply with our 2040 clean and renewable energy targets. So we've got to run twice as fast just to keep up and reach that target. So we have kind of a red queen problem. Just this afternoon, I was at the Michigan Energy Summit, and Sarah Mills, the professor at the University of Michigan, was talking about a guidebook that she produced. So I just found out about it this afternoon. I haven't read it myself, just downloaded it this evening. It's a brand new resource that provides guidance for Michigan communities. It's called What Michigan Local Governments Should Know About Data Centers. And I have the link down there. I'm sure John can send it out to all of you if you're interested. I know I'm going to be reading this tomorrow. Um, but it really does, a lot of the critical questions come down to local governments, planning commissions, zoning boards. What can they do to capture the benefits from these data centers? Because they are huge facilities that will bring a lot of property tax revenue to communities, but also they um, might impose costs on those communities uh, in many different ways, from noise, land use changes, and then more broadly, beyond the scope of local governments, all these challenges to our energy infrastructure. How are we going to build all this in a timely manner, and do it and comply with our renewable energy targets? So that is, yeah, we're right on time. It's 7:35. So that covers my presentation. We had an overview of the data centers. So you learned about the different types, from the conventional to this hyperscale for AI, energy and water use. I did not actually talk about water use. Um, I'll just tell you briefly. Um, a lot of these AI, well, if you've ever been, actually, if you can just pick up your laptop or your phone, that they get warm when you're using your computer. It actually gets a little bit warm. Well, you can imagine that a whole room full of computers. When I was a kid, my dad worked in IT. We would go to his office, with like the IBM mainframes, and they had air conditioners to keep them cool because they can overheat. Um, with the conventional data centers, you can use air conditioners, just regular air conditioners, maybe, slightly supersized or something, to keep them cool and operating efficiently. These AI chips, though, are so powerful, they get really, really hot. And simple air conditioners, your standard air conditioners, are insufficient to keep them cool. So that's part of what the energy um, system is, not only to run the processors, but to cool the chips. And when air conditioning is insufficient, they bring in water cooling systems. So there are once through systems where you're taking water from the municipal water supplier, usually, um, running it through that cold water absorbs that waste heat, and then you discharge it to the wastewater treatment facility. Increasingly, we're seeing closed loop systems in which the water is, the filled up the pipes one time, and then that water is recirculated. It absorbs the waste heat, then it goes to a chiller, it cools down, that heat is then discharged to the atmosphere, and then it recycles. So much more water efficient, but also much more energy intensive, because now you have to run the chiller to cool that water back down. And of course, you have lots of pumps. Some of these chips are actually immersed in the water itself. It's not even just, you know, uh, like a heat exchanger. Like the chips are actually in a fluid to cool them directly. So really advanced stuff going on. My colleague Dong Zhao, engineering professor at MSU, is one of the leading experts on water efficiency at data centers, and um, he has a lot to say about that. So you might want to talk to him.
Yeah, Eric,
Anyway,
why don't you stop the screen sharing? It'll be easier for us to see people raise their hands for questions.
sure.
There we
Yeah, so
go.
that covers it. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Who's got a question? Just raise your virtual hand if you. Okay, Dave Curtis, go ahead.
Yeah, you just struck a nerve there that the waste heat from chips could be used to assist with the creation of more electricity, just more efficient heat exchanging versus power.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good way to think about it, that every um, waste can also be a resource. And that was one of the uh, perks or opportunities of that Lansing facility that I talked about. They proposed tying their facility into Lansing's downtown hot water and steam service. So they were actually going to take that waste heat and tie it into the existing hot water service for their industrial customers through the Lansing Board of Water and Light, and kind of recycle that heat. So is actually why they wanted to build in downtown Lansing, to take advantage of that. So that's definitely possible. In Europe, there are data centers that are it's more common to tie into existing steam and hot water services to provide district heating for communities. So yeah, like you said, there are opportunities there for heat exchange and not see this just as a waste, but it's actually heat as a resource.
Yeah, go ahead, John Richter.
Yeah, hi Eric, welcome. I
Thanks.
am one of the GLREA's expert witnesses that represent us in cases, and I'll be
Mhm.
representing us in the variety of data center cases before the MPSC these days.
Mhm.
Um, and so, one of my key concerns, at least in that realm, is to ensure that other rate payer rate other customer classes don't end up
Yes.
subsidizing the data centers.
Mhm.
And I'm very concerned that sort of traditional allocation of costs to the customer classes is going to do exactly that.
Mhm.
And you had talked about consumers putting it in a different kind of mixed terminology there, customer class or a rate class. It's a different
Mhm.
rate sheet, but it's the same
Okay.
customer class, right? They're lumped in with
Mhm.
the other industrial users. And um, one of the things I'm thinking of proposing is to break out data centers into truly a separate customer class that would get their own allocations of generation, energy costs and capacity costs. And I was wondering if you had a thought on that idea.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do that to protect the other customers is to break them into their own uh, class, like you said, so those costs can be allocated directly to them. And that would address kind of the direct costs. Um, there are also indirect costs as these data centers get built. We're seeing that there's a wait time for natural gas turbines, for example, that's you know 5, 7 years out from now. Those prices for infrastructure are going up because the demand is increasing so much. There's the potential for, if we're using lots of natural gas, that all the demand from natural gas for data centers will just drive up the market price of natural gas just generally. And the Public Service Commission doesn't have any control over that. There's also um, I think the question of capacity markets was brought up in the PJM region, where
Yeah.
there's, you know, market demand for capacity is driving prices up, which the utilities are purchasing on these markets. So again, the Public Service Commission doesn't have a lot of authority on that. So there's all these indirect paths that are also potentially could affect ratepayers
I
generally.
love that you brought that up. I'm going to be testifying about exactly those three, and that there's a couple more. So, for example, the cost of buying a natural gas turbine, a gas plant, has
Mhm.
tripled in the last 3 years. That's not inflation. That's
Right.
excess demand. And like you said, the waiting time now is 5, 6, 7 years. Um, and yeah, I'm very concerned it's going to drive up natural gas prices, and that is a double whammy because that doesn't
Mhm.
just raise electricity rates, that raises people gas bill to heat their house, right?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
how obviously the MPSC can't control that, but how on earth could they quantify that and allocate those indirect costs to the data center class?
I think that's the $1 million question. I don't know if I don't have an answer to that. I'm about 6 months into the like the data center world. I am not an expert, but as the director of the Institute of Public Utilities since July, um, people have been knocking on my door or calling me with questions about data centers. So I've been trying to get as up to speed as I can on this issue to inform folks in Michigan and around the country. But I don't want to oversell myself as a data center expert here.
I'm studying every day. No, I'm looking at you as
Yeah.
the regulation expert, right?
Mhm.
I know what the data centers are doing. And the question is, how on earth do we change 100 years of tradition in how costs are allocated and such to account for things that just have never happened before?
Is
Mhm.
there any computer modeling that are starting to factor in data centers and indirect costs? Eric?
The Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has been doing a lot of work. Ryan Weiser is the person who leads that team. They have been pumping out lots of reports over the last 18 months or so on this. Um, so I think he would be my go-to resource for that question.
David,
Thank
go
you.
ahead with your question.
Hey, I been seeing on it was on public news, I believe, this morning that I was reading on a blog about the AI data center was dumping water and dropping the water pressure for basically the whole city surrounding it. Has anybody else heard anything about that?
Yeah, I read about that. It was in Atlanta. Uh, one of the large data centers somehow hooked up to the municipal water system and was not paying. They were drawing millions of gallons of water, and the water utility somehow was unaware for a few months until people started complaining that their water pressure uh, was going down. So this was just in the news a couple of days ago. So I guess they have corrected the problem, and the data center is now being metered and is paid for the water that they used and is paying the proper amount now. They fixed it. But yeah, because I think it's just a function of that all this stuff is happening so quickly and that it's hard to keep track of. Even at our utilities are even have a hard time keeping track of it.
Now, one more question. Now, I noticed, like you said, you've got closed loop systems. Is that inherently in the design for the AI cooling systems, or is that government regulated? Who's forcing them to do that portion of it?
So there's, as far as I know, there's no federal requirement to do that. The states, I don't think any states require that either, but I could be wrong. There just aren't a lot of regulations of these things anywhere right now. I mean, like, it's an active area that people are looking at. So it's, you end up trading off water use versus energy use. If you do the once through cooling, you use more water, but less electricity. If you do the closed loop, you use less water, but more electricity. And um, I guess it depends on, the abundance of water. If you're in a water constrained environment, then, a closed loop system might be much more attractive. Um, but that's a kind of it depends.
Wow. So just one more question. So I'm assuming
Sure.
with that being the case, then the ideal of monitoring this water exposure, whether it's contact based as far as metals, as far as toxins coming off of the material, and
Hmm.
either going through an evaporative cooler or staying in a loop. But as we all know, it doesn't stay in that loop continuously. It,
Hmm.
are there any requirements that you know of? Are they forced to be monitoring this water if there's potential exterior exposure or release?
Yeah, that's up to the individual states, I think. I don't have a good answer for you there. I'm
Wow.
sorry.
Okay. No. Like you said, it's all brand spanking new because they're gonna try to get it through as they're gonna try to do as much as they possibly can as fast as they can before regulation really chops down on them. And I can see that definitely being a push point.
Hmm.
All right, appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Hey, Faye and Steve, go ahead. You're muted. Faye or Steve, are you there? Well, while they're working on getting unmuted. Oh, why don't let's see. Uh, David. Whoops.
Thank you, John. A question on the renewable energy. Google has made commitments to add new renewable energy to some of their data centers. Would these systems be operated by Google, or would they be operated, for example, by the utility that they're also drawing power from? Um, and
Yeah.
if it's operated by the utilities, would the utilities double count and say, well, we need to add this much renewable energy, so we'll just count the Google part as our commitment?
So from what I'm understanding, the data center owners do not want to be in the utility business. They do not, they would prefer not to own all this infrastructure. Most of them anyway. So Google, in like the case of Project Cannoli, Google will not own this. They're going to work with DTE, and DTE is going to own that 1,600 megawatts of solar and the batteries and things like that. Now, some of the, I should clarify, there may be cases where some of that battery is behind the meter, some of it might be in front of the meter. Whether it's backup power specifically for a facility, I don't know. So there might be little details like that. Maybe John,
In the case
John
of
has,
the
but mostly it's going to be owned by the utility in most cases.
in the case of the Google data center that I believe is being constructed in Pine Island, Minnesota, south of the Twin Cities, part of their commitment besides wind and solar is using these 100-hour discharge iron oxide batteries produced in West Virginia. So that's a new technology. I think they're probably some of the first large-scale customers to try to be deploying that.
Mhm.
So the choice of technology, is that up to the data center, or does the utility or public service commission get involved in looking at what kind of new renewable sources or storage sources might be brought online?
I think that's just a conversation between the utility, the data centers, the regulators. Um, yeah, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about what's going to be
I
brought in.
can elaborate on
Thank
that
you.
first
Sure.
question a little bit. So yeah, DT is going to own the power or the renewable energy generation and the batteries. They're going to operate them. Google's going to pay for them, but then Google will get credits from DTE for the value of the energy and capacity that those facilities generate, almost as if Google was owning them and selling the power on the MISO auctions. So it's a very odd arrangement. I believe that's definitely for the Google one. I believe the one in Saline is set up that way for some of the portion of renewable energy on that program. On the batteries, I'll talk about another data center. So there's one proposed in South Lyon, which is 3 miles from my house. So I happen to know a lot about that one. And that's going to be like 500 and something megawatts. And they are going to have enough lithium ion batteries on site to power the entire center for 4 hours. And they are not going to have backup generators. They're going to rely on the batteries for that.
Wow.
And they have alluded that they'll coordinate discharge of those at times of high grid stress with the utility. Sounds sort of like demand response, although they didn't use that term. So I'm very interested to see how that goes, because I think if you can get data centers on a demand response program, then you get the capacity credit for that uh, in the capacity auction, and you don't run into the problems that PJM has, where the cost of capacity has skyrocketed, and it's driving up everyone's electric rates, including the residential customers.
Hey,
Mhm.
John
Thank-
Richter, a question for you about the integrated resource plans, which GLREA is involved in those cases. How do you expect the AI data center issues will be addressed in the IRP process?
Very poorly.
Oh, okay.
I'll elaborate on that. So they are going to, as their baseline, only include capacity for data or demand from data centers that have been approved, have a signed contract, right? So consumers doesn't have any of those. DTE only has one at the moment, right? So that's going to be their baseline, and then they're going to have some projections about potential large, increases in demand, but they've been very cagey about just how high they're going to go on those analyses. But the other thing we know is both of the utilities, because neither of them have filed their IRPs yet, right?
Mhm.
Consumers is going to file in June. But both of them have said they're going to build new gas plants, right? So I'll make a prediction right here, which is, within the next, no, I don't know, 5, 6 years, Michigan utilities are going to take the off ramp out of the RPS because they're not going to be able to put up renewable energy fast enough to meet demand and stay within the parameters of the clean energy law. That's what I think is going to happen. That's a prediction. Obviously, it's not provable or disprovable at this point.
Go ahead, Jen.
Did we lose Jen?
There we
Yeah,
go.
there you
Hey,
go.
sorry. Thank you. Yeah, and once again, UP's leading the way in that UMRIC, the We Energy subsidiary that operates, the Wisconsin utility that operates as a subsidiary in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, has gotten a delay on its renewable energy plan by hyperinflating its numbers, and it's gonna get to rewrite its renewable energy plan into 26. Yeah, I see that. And then the IRP, for folks who don't know, is the Integrated Resource Plan, is actually an opportunity for the public to also participate in commenting on what the utility is planning to do. It's one of the few places you can do that. It's something to really pay attention to. The comments can really matter in terms of a way to indicate your concerns about these projects. And um, and speaking of that, because I do, yeah, there's also the renewable. I would like your opinion, actually, John, on the renewable energy plan versus the IRP and how you're seeing those fold together, or Erik, and how you see those are folding together. The renewable energy plan is something that came out of the 2023 energy law.
Yeah, John, do you want to?
Sure. So it used to be all of your capacity planning was done in the IRPs, right? Which are by law required every 5 years, but sometimes the utilities have done them more often than that. Now, because of the higher, RPS standard, we're seeing so much more of the capacity planning being done in the renewable energy plan because they have to build a whole lot of new renewable energy to meet the 50% standard in 2030. And so, to some degree, the renewable energy plan has kind of stolen the show from the capacity plan. I would say up until now with the data centers, that's shifted back because they're going to build gas plants and propose those in the IRPs
Mm.
in order to meet the 24-hour demand of data centers. Data centers are not like factories. They work 365 days a year, 24 hours a day at full capacity. So it's a very flat load. It goes up a little bit in the summer because there's more cooling to do. But 80% of the load is just constant all through the year. And that's how a 1.4 gigawatt data center can increase DTE sales by 25% is because it's running all the time.
But that's also a place where we can negotiate with them to have them agree to scale back even 10%, and either 10% scale back or 10% of the time, to create more flexibility on the grid, theoretically, to help solve other problems, theoretically. I don't trust
Yeah,
them,
and
but
there's kind of three ways to that. And I think people tend to talk about the one you did, right? Which is they can actually slow down their processors or turn off some of them, right, and reduce their power. And some of them have done that. And Google, one of the two, yeah, I think it's Google is planning on doing some of that, right, for a few years until the grid kind of catches up. That's part of the contract. But there's two other approaches. And one is you say the grid's under stress, take your whole data center offline, off grid, and run it off your backup generators just as if there was a power outage. Now, in the first DTE case, the Celine case, the commission ordered that DTE make it clear that if they have to shed load, they can't meet demand, the data center gets shut off first. And DTE has
mm,
written into their new emergency procedures policy, and that is a docket number I could look up. And they're applying that rule to all of the data centers. And I'm assuming that that's going to happen with consumers too in some other case, but it hasn't come out yet. Um, So they're on notice. They're the first to get shut off if there's a shortage, right? And my suggestion is just go one step further and make it part of your demand response program, because then you get the capacity credit. The way they're doing it right now, we don't get the capacity credit at MISO. So I think it would be functionally almost the same and very advantageous if we made that. But I'm talking too much here. I'll stop.
Well, it's 8 o'clock, and unless somebody has a burning question, I think it's time for us to kind of adjourn. But thank you, Erik, very much. This is a great presentation, great discussion. I don't really think we can have not with, we need even more discussion about the AI data centers, because I do think that, it's got a huge impact, a lot of misinformation. And yeah, we need to keep talking about it. And yeah, we focused on electricity, but water use, right, is a big issue too. So again,
John,
Erik, thank you very much.
John.
Pleasure.
Yes.
Erik, could you
Yes.
email your PowerPoint to John?
Yes.
So if anybody on the recording would like a clear copy of the PowerPoint, that John could email it out, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll send it to John and he can pass along my contact information and the PowerPoint.
Thank you as much. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Take
Yeah.
care.
Bye.